Welcome to Forte's MBA Alumnae Insight Series. Each of these recordings features a panel of successful businesswomen representing diverse industries and career stages, as featured during our Forte MBA forums.
I'm going to turn it over to our amazing panel. I'm so excited for this conversation. I'm so excited to listen in. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Nogi.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. My name is Nogi Udevulu. I will be your moderator for today's panel. A little bit about myself. I am MBA grad, class of 2006 from the University of Virginia, the Darden School of Business. That was before Forte was founded. So you can date me back about almost 15 years ago. I am a managing director at Bank of America, and I lead a group in market strategy within the data and innovation group. So data is becoming such a big thing. A lot of people will call me quant. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not, but this is all about you today. And I have with me 4 dynamic women, Vivian, Wala, Alex, and Dawn, that will be telling you about themselves and asking questions that I know that are pressing in your heart today. So let's start with Vivian. Vivian, can you give us a little background about yourself?
Hi, everyone. So glad you could join today. I'm happy to introduce myself. My name is Vivian Nasamu Odior. Full background, my career started many years ago in actually sales. I sold for DHL Express, and after a number of years, I'd say 3 or 4 years of post-undergrad experience, I decided I wanted to pivot my career and go back to my roots. I'd studied advertising and broadcast journalism in undergrad, and I was missing some of that marketing piece. And so I went to Fuqua School of Business at Duke, focused on marketing, and came back out to do brand management for Johnson & Johnson for the last 9 years. And I recently joined the WhatsApp team leading global integrated marketing.
Thank you. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dawn Christian. I am class of 2008, the Johnson School of Business at Cornell University. And I've been out for about 13 years. I am the Senior Vice President of Inclusion and Diversity at GCI Health. It's a very recent change. For 13 years prior to this, I was leading brand management, brand launches, and brand identity across biotechs, including Amgen, Astellas, and most recently AstraZeneca over that 13 years post-MBA. Prior to that, I was in staffing. We can go way back into that, but I've been doing the corporate thing for about 20 years, leading me to a legacy of I&D and a commitment to I&D, which has led me to the most recent transition. Very happy to be here with you all.
Thank you, Dawn. And Alex?
Hey, folks. I think it's, I'm going to be counting in our call today how many times folks start speaking while they're on mute. I think "you're on mute" is the definitive phrase now of 2020. So we'll all have a giggle every time that happens for the rest of this, this hour. My name is Alex Walker-Turner. I'm based out of Toronto. I attended the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto for my MBA. Prior to that, I have 2 degrees in politics. So I come from a slightly non-traditional background with respect to sort of MBA. I spent my early career actually working with corporate media and events business, running editorial content and project management across large-scale corporate events, conferences, webinars, etc. Spent some time actually working in London as part of that organization, and then made the choice to kind of move back to Toronto to pursue my MBA. So I'm excited to talk through a little bit of that thought process. I now work as an engagement manager with McKinsey, and I am affiliated to our digital practice. So a lot of my McKinsey life is spent doing digital strategy for financial services and public sector clients. And then I also do pure strategy work in the social sector and philanthropic areas as well. So excited to talk to folks about some of that.
Thank you, Alex. And Wala?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Wala El Sheikh, and I'm class of 2010, Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. Prior to IU, I worked at Goldman Sachs in the finance division for about 4 years. That was my undergrad degree. I really thought I was going to be in finance forever. I made it to sort of one of the most coveted firms, but life has a different plan than you intend, and a calling came to me to start a nonprofit called Birthright Africa, which was exactly what I intended to do coming out of business school, looking to gain the management and strategic skills that I didn't quite have because I had such an analytical role being in the finance division. Also needed to make that career switch from one sector to another, and I felt the MBA would really be a great chance to do that. And so I switched over to the education sector, knowing that the Birthright Africa mission, which is to provide free educational trips to Africa for youth and young adults of African descent, would really be in partnership with the education sector. And so after a career of about 10 years, I've now been full-time on founding and running the nonprofit as a CEO over the last few years.
Thank you. And you know what? We're going to start with you. I think all the panelists can go off mute now because we want this to be conversational. We want folks to chime in. And while I will start with you, why an MBA? I know you mentioned it, but give us the laydown of what really happened. What triggered that decision?
So, I come from a family with master or PhD level degree. So I kind of knew I wanted to get a master's degree. So the question was really what type? And when I drilled down on the different options and where I thought I wanted to go, because of a business background, I kind of naturally leaned towards the MBA. But then I also came to realize that it felt like the most marketable degree to me, that I could really use it almost in any sector. I was also lucky to have the Management Leadership for Tomorrow Fellowship, which seems to be similar to Forte in that prep period before applying. And I really learned the value of using an MBA to career switch and or career enhance. And I needed to do both. So for me, it was exciting to learn that I could really leverage an MBA, take the time out to really understand who I am, what passions do I have, and how I can leverage those skills for what I want to do in the future. And because I had a very clear idea too, but not really knowing that I had the networks and the access to it, that an MBA would afford me the ability to develop those networks and that access. And so sure enough, through the business school opportunity, I learned about the Education Pioneers Fellowship, and that was my summer in between year 1 and year 2 that catapulted me into the education sector and built a network there because I didn't have it, right, coming out of finance. And so that was like a really tangible outcome, in addition to then focusing all my studies on strategic management. I was like not looking to do anything with Excel because I had worked on Excel for 4 years in a row. And I was like, nothing related to Excel will be in my MBA program. And so it was all marketing, strategy, and concepts that I knew would help me understand how to lead and manage an organization and develop one from scratch. So that, summarizes a lot of the pieces for me.
That's amazing. Alex, would you like to share why an MBA?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not so far removed, this decision-making process for me. So it still feels quite vivid. I think a lot of parallels, Wala, to some of the things that you mentioned, and some pieces that are quite divergent. So, for context and maybe in contrast, I'm actually the only person in my immediate family with a university degree, and had a master's degree already, when I decided to come back and do the MBA. The reason I chose to do the MBA is a fewfold. I was lucky enough at the time when I was making the decision to have progressed in the business that I was supporting at the time to a senior management team position. I had accelerated fairly rapidly and was being asked to kind of opine on topics that, in the back of my mind, I was going, I actually have no business opining on these topics. I shouldn't be being asked to look at like the, enterprise level financials and to, make commentary on this without really the toolkit that I felt I needed to be able to add value in those conversations. And so part of it for me was a toolkit discussion. I knew I had the intrinsics to be part of those conversations. Now I wanted the hard skills to be able to add value. So that was a critical piece for me. One of the things you said around network, I think, was really important. I had just spent, the last few years developing a network in a particular field, and also in a particular area of the world that I didn't necessarily intend to be in the long term. And so, knowing that I wanted to be somewhat of a career switcher, it was important to me to come back to Toronto and to have some sort of mechanism by which I could develop a local network, and also gain access to the industry in which I wanted to add value, longer term, which was in strategy and management consulting. So made the switch to come back and kind of do the MBA here in order to build that toolkit, but also to really, really lean in on developing the network and the access to the opportunities that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hearing two things here: build that network and enhance managerial skills. So that's awesome. Now, Dawn, do you mind sharing your application journey? I know when everyone thinks MBA, they go, wow. But then when they look at that application and all that is required, I think 50% just change their mind almost immediately. Like, no, I don't want to do this. So Dawn, please share. How did you go about your application journey?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. And I will actually reflect on both Wala and Alex's comments a bit in this response, because as I looked at the application process, I was just like, first, how do you even choose a business school? Do you just go to the top 10 list? How do you do this? How do you know where you're supposed to show up? And I can give you all kinds of commentary on lists and how lists are created, and what a good fit is. I too am an MLT alum. Forte was, I think, a year old when I started business school, so I didn't do their program, but I did do MLT. And if you want more information on what that is, I'm happy to glean on that. But also, similar to Wala, I am a multi-generational advanced degree person in my family. I am the youngest of 6. Everyone has a college degree, and most of them have multiple master's degrees. So, but I am the first woman in my family, in my last 2 generations, to get an MBA. And so that process was really about finding what an MBA really meant. And I think, Wala, I think you were the one that said this was a degree that had a lot of prongs to it, right? You can go a lot of different ways and kind of define yourself and kind of be a little bit nebulous all at the same time. But that was important. The other piece is not all MBA programs are created the same. Right, so there's the case study method, full 100%, and then there's a mix of. And for me, no shade on full case study, but for me, I wanted the mix because I wanted to know that I knew the information, not just the team that I was on, but just me. And so I chose, and some of that is what you don't know, right? I didn't go to an all case study method, so that could have been a wrong, a misread. But for me, I wanted to validate that by having the mix. And so I chose programs that had a mix of all case study of case study and your own studies. So that's part of the application process. The other piece is for me also affordability. I'm a Roy H. Park Fellow. This was pre-consortium for Cornell. So what a Roy H. Park Fellow was for my generation, because even that has changed, was a full fellowship and a stipend, as well as requiring me to do a leadership service project while I was in school. So I not only had to show up, do the work, but I also had to contribute back to the Cornell community, which was important to me in terms of style, the community, what it meant to show up at Cornell, and also as an African-American Black female making a mark. Not just showing up, but showing out. That's part of who I am. So that was a part of where I wanted to be. And so that also spoke to the community of it all. Some of us, I think, went to remote schools. That was important for me. I'm from California, y'all. Like California big cities, and I was moving from New York, but Ithaca is not California. It's not even New York City. But what it was is a focused small town where there really wasn't any more to do than to be an MBA student and to be focused. The class size was a big piece of it. So looking at all of these pieces, we were a large class at 314 students. So that was important. And then the mix that was almost 50-50 women to men, that was a part of the application process. And so for me, showing up, being seen, having people invested in what was important to me, and being in a small community, and then being called to task on the rigor of the studies was important to me. And I think you'll get it at any of these programs. I'll be honest, I considered every program on here except for the one in Toronto because I'm just not from Toronto. So they're all strong programs. But I think the biggest piece is really figuring out, what do you need? Because what an MBA isn't is a magic wand. What it is it's your 2 years to be very selfish about what it is that you want to do next, pre, post, and peri. What's your story? And so that's a part of that application process. And I know that's not really about the application, but getting that GMAT together and also knowing where you're applying is as important as how you show up on that application. And it also tells you how to show up on that application. Are you speaking to the things, the values, the way the program runs, saying things like you want to be in a mix of a case study and a one-on-one class experience, or studying abroad was important to me. Not all programs have study abroad. I studied abroad. Saying those things in your application really align you, the person, with the program, and also highlight your application and show that you've paid attention to the program that you're applying to.
Awesome. And you mentioned some things that we're about to flow into, which is GMAT and, preparing to enter the classroom setting again. And Vivian is going to honor us with her experience about the GMAT, as well as, getting your mind reset from working and earning a paycheck to going into a classroom and being told what to do while paying for it. So Vivian, walk us through your experience.
Yeah, no, really great question. And I'll echo or build off of what Dawn said, in that, the one thing that was so true for me in the application process was it was such a great time of self-reflection and self-awareness. By the time I was done with my application, it was almost like birthing a baby. There was like this assessment of who I'd been, who I was, and who I wanted to be. And I think with that comes some really interesting ways to think about, how do you approach preparation, right? So in terms of being aware of who I was and who I'd been, I studied broadcast journalism and advertising in undergrad, and I actually went out of my way to petition in front of the school board every year out of all the math classes I could possibly petition out of. If it had numbers, I wanted nothing to do with it. I convinced them I wanted to do logic, and I would find substitute courses and make a case for how they were going to build the same skill set in me. So when I learned, when I had the realization I wanted to go to business school, one of the first things that pinged for me was, crap, I'm going to have to go back and take calculus. I'm going to have to go back and take all of these things that I petitioned out of. And so be really aware of your journey up until this point and understand the things that you may or may not have had exposure to. And the way some of that self-awareness comes is talk to people, engage with a lot of people who've been to business school, build on those dialogues, and you start to see the gaps that you need to fill for yourself. And that helps you understand, okay, I might need some exposure to statistics, I might need some exposure to economics, or I just need to start watching the news and be, maybe more globally minded or inclusive in my thinking, because school is going to push me there. So those are some preparation tips. As far as the GMAT goes, I think you do also need to know yourself. Like, what is your preparation mindset? You have to be really good at studying. I did 2 different ways. I did take a preparation program for the GMAT, one of those like Princeton reviews, if you will, and then, studied for about 3 to 6 months and then took it and didn't do well. And I pivoted because I found that the way for me to approach the GMAT was like training for something, and to think about it as a muscle. And so it was better for me to pick a point out in the next 3 months that I wanted to take the GMAT, go ahead and pay for that, schedule that, and then marathon study kind of over and over and over again in a shorter time frame than to spread it out and do it when I, study when I felt like. That helped it feel recent. It helped really get my muscles ready in terms of taking the GMAT, and I saw dramatic results that way. So just have a good sense of, the kind of person you are in terms of coming up with your preparation plan, and also have accountability partners, because that's going to go a long way. So those are the things that I did to prepare to go back to school. I did try to, and I'll tell you one thing I failed at. I got some business books. I thought maybe I'd read some textbooks ahead of time. Don't do that. You'll do that in school. Relax your mind. Enjoy the peace and quiet before school. And when you get there, you'll learn the tough business things.
Cool. Did you do any pre-MBA internships? Because I know that's something that has been flagged for many years now, where folks do an internship before school.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't do specifically an internship. At the time, I joined some organizations within, kind of like an advertising federation or marketing federation, where you could do kind of bonus work for companies or volunteer work. And that helped me confirm that these were the spaces that I wanted to go into. So think about being creative that way. If an internship isn't an option, if you're already thinking that you really want to pivot from one career to another, I definitely say seek out an internship if you can, just so that you can get some testing under your belt. Because the one thing that people don't really share enough is things move really fast once you start school. So you don't really have that much time to fully discover yourself. You sort of have to have a sense of where you want to go so you can hit the ground running. So as much as that you can do, definitely do that.
Okay. Usually during the MBA panels, I always like to tell this GMAT story. For anyone who's afraid of taking the GMAT, look at me. I run a quant group, and yes, I am super analytical. I love math, I love finance, and I love minting money. However, my GMAT score was woeful, okay? And I always tell that story not to scare you, but to encourage you that it's one of the many factors of applying to business school, and it's not the end all be all. So I took the GMAT, I think 3 times, partly because I had this, I'm too intelligent. I know math. Why is this so hard for me? 1. And 2, because I didn't realize that it was actually a technique. So again, keep all of this in mind while you're going through the process. So I did the GMAT 3 times. The first 2 times, I hit that average that they tell you you can't improve your score by more than 30 points. That was my average. And then the 3rd time, when I really figured out what was going on, I improved it by 150 points. And I made a case and said, listen, I may not have 800 or whatever, I don't know, is it 850, 750 that folks have, but I broke that average, that historical average that everyone is always talking about. So I am very good for this school, right? And you'll be amazed, when I got into business school, all the finance professors knew my name. I was in almost every one of them, that they actually begged me to drop one and take a leadership class. That's how addicted to finance I am. And I'm a numbers person. So don't get so worried about the GMAT score. Give it your best, understand the techniques, and just keep it moving. All right, we'll move on to financing. You see, I love how this is going. So Dawn and Alex are going to tell us about how they financed their MBA and what steps they took to get prepared for that huge chunk of money, because it's not small money. Dawn, would you like to share?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to resound what you just said about the GMAT, because GMAT was not my friend. I took the GMAT a whole bunch of times, but I said that I was a Roy H. Park Fellow. My education was paid for, and I was granted a stipend. It is one portion of your application. Please do not let the GMAT, GRE, it's a test to see how well you took a test. It is not an indicator of how well you will do in business school. Also, folks lie. Everybody did not get an 850 on their GMAT. Just do you. you have other fabulous things about you, accelerate those, and that'll be amazing. For me, in terms of financing my GMAT, for financing my education, I was so I'm going to just go ahead and caveat and let y'all know that I just speak real. So as a Black female, I wasn't paying for this. The MBA was going to be my 40 acres and a mule. And if you don't know what I mean when I say 40 acres and a mule, Google it, figure it out. But I felt like I have contributed as a marginalized woman in corporate America for, at that point, I think I went into business school at 10 years post undergrad. I felt like I had not only proven, but shown and demonstrated my leadership as a senior leader. I was in a senior leadership role when I went into business school. And also I felt like there were a lot of opportunity on the table to at least help this be something that was financed. So I applied to every fellowship I could. If it had anything to do with something I thought about, I applied. So that meant consortium, that meant the Rage Park Fellowship, that meant the Black MBA, that meant a whole bunch of other ones. I just applied for everything. If you gave me $20, I was good. If you gave me the whole education, it was fine. But for me, it was about the fact that I was coming from an experience where I was coming off of a nonprofit. I did not have a whole lot of money. And so I thought the real investment was going to be my 2 years of not having an income. So I decided to be really targeted on researching fellowships and grants and scholarships that would align to my goals. And so I did that. But in doing that, you have to be cognizant of all the things that you show up as, and making sure that you have those references in place, that you've done things. We're talking pre-MBA internships, but what else have you done? Have you sat on boards? Have you volunteered consistently? What else about you is beyond where you've been paid to work, and showing up that way? And it's not only about getting the money, but it's also about seeing your value and people investing in you. The fellowship that I had required me to do a service project that I had to give back to Cornell University while studying and doing all the things all the other MBAs were doing, and recruiting and everything else. So there are requirements to how you show up. And I still show up at Cornell, including tonight, several times a year, because I think I'm paying it forward for what was invested into me. So while I say that I was a Rage Park Fellow, and I can talk to anybody about that, or consortium, we were not a consortium school at the time, but I was a consortium awardee at the Kelley School of Business. I can talk to you about consortium and other options, but it is about figuring out how you show up and how you can be invested in. And I think especially for women, and especially for women of color, this is something that is an opportunity for someone to not only see, but invest in your value, but know that you pay it forward.
Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how to follow something like that. So I think two things. I'll do a typical consulting thing here and say I think there are two questions we're trying to answer. One is, how do you get enough cash to get in the door? And the second is, how do you rationalize that in terms of the cost benefit or the opportunity cost, right, of actually taking a year or 2 years out of the workforce to invest in yourself? I think for me, the first question, how do I get enough cash to get through the door, was a bit of a patchwork. So I was a Forte fellow, so I had a fellowship from Forte, which was, hugely helpful in terms of financing my MBA. I had a few, pennies to rub together from family who were as generous as they could be to kind of support me in that endeavor. I also had student loans through the federal and provincial governments here. And then in addition, Rotman has a financing program with one of the major banks in Canada that provides bank finance student loans, which you then sort of pay back over a certain amount of time. So I think one thing to maybe think about as you consider how you'll finance your MBA is how to leverage and what programs the schools have that you can leverage to generate the liquidity that you need over the course of the 1 or 2 years. So that's a big one. And then also, you know, what does the federal, you know, and state or provincial government offer that you can leverage in terms of financial assistance. So that's the sort of story around how do you get your foot in the door. I think there's another piece around opportunity cost, right? Which is not just how do I get enough money to, you know, enroll, but also how do I rationalize this as an investment, given that I'm not only paying money, but I'm also, you know, giving up what I would have been making over the 1 or 2 years in the program. I think there are a few different ways to think about this, right? One is, you know, how will I improve my earning potential by investing in myself over the next couple of years, and what will the net benefit be to my annual income? And what does that look like in terms of an acceleration of my trajectory over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, right? And then, you know, those economics start to make a lot of sense. I think you can also consider, you know, ways to continue earning while you're in the MBA, and that can look a few different ways. One is to consider doing a part-time MBA. Lots of schools offer part-time MBAs where you can continue to earn your income while you study, which come with a slew of, you know, other complexities around how do you manage your time, and, you know, how do you, you know, articulate why you're doing an MBA to your employer who's concerned that you're not giving, you know, your all in one area of your life while you know, invest in the other. So I understand obviously that has complexity, but, you know, that's one way to kind of think about it. The other is, of course, internships, right? So how do you take the time between your, say you're doing a 2-year MBA, how do you take the time, you know, between those 2 years to generate some income? And lots of schools offer internship programs, or you can, you know, self-seek, self-source an internship as well. And I was lucky enough to actually secure an internship, which allowed me to continue earning income into and through my 2nd year of the MBA, which was quite helpful as well. So, you know, lots of different options, I think, to consider, and, you know, definitely look into, you know, the pros and cons of different schools in terms of what they offer from a financing perspective, and then also in terms of like flexible study and internship programs as well.
Thank you. That was actually very detailed and true in terms of opportunity costs, because very often we think about the cost of the MBA, but then sometimes we forget about the cost of 2 years of not earning money. So that was good. I liked how you laid it down. Now we're going back to Vivian and Waller. And the question is, are you doing what you thought you would be doing post MBA? I know Waller has basically said it multiple times already today, but I would, you know, I'm going to ask the question again. Are you doing what you thought you would be doing? How was that journey? Was it, you know, right after business school, you started BetRight Africa, or did you have to work for a nonprofit organization first? How did you build out your network? How did you advance? Like, was it as clean cut as you wrote it in your essay? That's a better question. When you look back at your essay, you and Vivian, because both of you are answering this question, when you look back at your essay and look at where you are today, does it match?
Basically, for me, it does. I mean, I am the co-founder and CEO of Birthright Africa, so I had a vision. I figured it was going to take somewhere between 10 to 15 years. So I strategically realized I need to work in the education sector for a set number of years before I feel confident enough with my skills, knowledge, and networks to then jump ship completely into entrepreneurship. And so, you know, but along the way, I was doing a bunch of things. I registered the website. I was talking about it with anyone I could because I wanted to make sure people knew this was coming. And if I could plant seeds, they would connect me to other people. Of course, that meant in the education sector itself, getting either full-time, part-time, or consulting roles. I was very entrepreneurial in my career in that way, very strategic that every single job and position that I was getting would lead to the founding of Birthright Africa. So that's what my suggestion would be for those who have entrepreneurial aspirations. What an MBA did for me, another reason for the why, was I knew there were certain careers or jobs I could not access without an MBA. the Education Pioneers Fellowship being one, where it was literally for graduate level individuals. And so to access that kind of network that would ultimately now has like over, I think, 7,000 alum working in education sectors throughout the country. At any point, I can call someone up and say, hi, I did the Education Pioneers Fellowship. Let's talk, let's have a conversation. And with Birth by Africa, we partner specifically with high schools, colleges, and community-based organizations to, you know, to deliver on our mission. So I speak the language of the sector that I worked in for 10 years, focused in college and career readiness because that was the age that I was looking to impact. And I wasn't exactly sure about that detail, but having the MBA gave me the flexibility over 10 years to discover exactly what I needed to do to ultimately launch Birthright. And back to Dawn's point, what I did also before business school, because I was at Goldman, remember, for 4 years, I had to test this passion for the nonprofit and education sector. Do I have what it takes? Am I okay with a salary cut? And I dabbled in volunteering, and then I ultimately actually left Goldman before business school because I realized the passion was there, and I tested working full time for a nonprofit, and I absolutely loved it. The salary didn't matter. So I came to realize I'm that person. It's not about a salary or a certain financial goal. It's the ability to, you know, be in the work and the passion that I have. The money will come. The other reason for the MBA was I knew I was going to be engaging and building networks with people who were working at corporate, and I could ask them for donations, both individual, corporate, and foundation. And that's starting to happen. And I know we're going to talk about that in a moment. So I'll give a teaser there.
Awesome. Awesome. Vivian.
Yeah, so my answer is yes, but it's complicated. I wrote, that I wanted to, come out of the MBA program and join a global company that was focused on brand management and be able to influence and impact girls' self-esteem and self-image through the products that I managed. I also wrote that there was a couple experiences I wanted in that career, including cause marketing, multicultural marketing, learning how to be a people manager, and an international experience. And then I had this vision of launching a brand that would be focused on empowering women and girls. In my mind, that was a personal care brand. So everything that I just said actually came to fruition, except I have not yet launched this personal brand, and I know that it's not going to be a personal care brand. I came out of school, I immediately went into Johnson & Johnson. I started working on Clean & Clear and their beauty portfolio, and really steeped my skills in multicultural marketing and cause marketing right away. I quickly became a manager, started leading people, made a name for myself, building equity with brands, and starting to make an impact in society with the kind of marketing I did. And that had an amazing opportunity to take my talents to Africa, Middle East, where I led the Johnson's baby business for some time. When I came back from that, I recognized that I wanted to continue my path in marketing on a more global scale, and that I wanted to be able to make sure that I impact women, both on a personal level. And so I've rethought that final vision. I've started doing some work with coworkers and friends who have the same passion for empowering women. And so I've pivoted that personal brand perspective to something that looks a little bit different that I'm working on. And so now I'm taking that skill set from the business side and continuing on a career path, and that personal mission piece is now on a different, on a different plane. And I'm excited because the MBA really did set me up for that. And so I think both short-term and long-term in the way that you think about this.
I think you pretty much covered what you put on your essay, just from what I heard. So you're definitely doing what you said you were going to do. So that's awesome. So the next question we have really centers around the importance of the MBA network. And I think literally all of you touched on that MBA network. I remember when I made up my mind I was going to get an MBA, then I started looking for folks, because I worked at Lehman Brothers before going to business school. And I started looking at people who had MBAs and taking them out to lunch in my really small salary. Taking them out to lunch and dinner and just asking them questions. And honestly, that set off my network building. So I literally started while I was on the job, just talking to people about MBAs. And then they introduced me to people, and then they introduced me to more people. And I just kept building out my network. That network still solid till today. The first person that introduced me to Twigo, I met her, I saw her, I think in October of last year at, actually no, January of this year in Atlanta. After how many years? Like 14 years. So it's just amazing. These networks actually end up really helping. So I would like, Dawn, for you to share about your building out your MBA network and how it has helped you even up till now to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of us have resonated on the network. Alex moving back to Toronto, Vivian, you know, with your choice on what you wanted to do next, Walla on establishing Birthright Africa, Nogi on getting into MBA. So here's the thing. That is what an MBA's most valuable portion is. It's not a class. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I love my university. I love Cornell, but it wasn't a class. It was the network. When I get in a crunch and I need to figure out how to do something like launch my now company, Belong by Dawn Christian, I lean into the network broadly. And I think you've heard from us that not only are we alumni from our institutions, we also have other connections. Twigo, Management Leaders for Tomorrow, Forte. I'm an Inroads alum. All of these things, and these people come together. What happens in an MBA is that all the smartest, most talented, most connected folks end up sitting in this space together that would know. I mean, on my first day, I had no idea. I met a guy whose family owned diamond mines and a guy who owned banks, and they were 20-something years old. And they were like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want to do biotech pharma marketing. And I was like, what do you do? Oh, my family owns diamond mines and I'm going to go build a nonprofit and I own a few banks. And I'm sitting here like, what am I doing here? But what you're doing there is building connections with people in a way just by showing up in your seat day one. Then when you start showing up and raising your hand and showing your perspective, and all the perspectives matter, I want you to understand that once you're in an MBA program, they coordinated that. They wanted the person with a nonprofit background. They wanted the person who can't add 2 and 2 together. They wanted the person who speaks well and is outspoken and the person who's best as an introvert. They wanted all of those people in one place because knowing how to connect with those people is the biggest piece of an MBA. And you're starting it today by showing up here, connecting with us online. I'll share my information, but I'm also reaching out to these women that are on this panel today because it doesn't stop. Networking becomes an addiction and a necessary function of your career that can start with your MBA, but it continues on. And it starts with showing up with saying, this is what matters to me. And as crazy as that idea may seem, you will start to find that other people are like, that's a really good idea. I own a company that talks about belonging. 20 years ago, people would have been like, what in the world are you talking about? Show up, fit in, do this, right? But it's a whole entire thing, right? And so I say that to you because an MBA, the biggest piece for me is showing up on things like this today and remembering all these names and continuing to connect with these names, not just for business, not just for a job, not just to get into B school, but to have that person that you can lean into and say, what do you think about this? And not being shy about asking for that input and it being okay for them to have a different opinion, but it makes you better and getting comfortable with that.
That, I mean, you summed it up really well. And while I had talked about her network multiple times, but just give us an example. Like, how did you build out your network? Because of course, Birthright Africa is something that requires a lot of interaction with different organizations, financing, expertise, mind sharing. So walk us through one example, and then we go into the topic of giving back, which Alex and Vivian will
Oh,
wrap
one
up for us.
example.
Yeah.
Okay. So, um, I strategically moved to DC knowing the nonprofit and education sector was really creative and innovative there. And that's where I also did my Education Pioneers Fellowship. But I did a few roles. What I'll actually point out is me deciding to return to New York purposely to launch Birthright. Because I gained the skills and the knowledge, but somehow my personal and my professional network actually started to intersect better in New York. And I had personal reasons to come back to New York, but I was also like, I want to start my nonprofit where I grew up. And I just had a feeling that I would meet this right one person that would take it to the next level and help, especially with the fundraising component. Because let's be clear, you know, at the end of the day, a nonprofit has to figure out how it's going to gain revenue too. We have to be as strategic, build brands, build the awareness around it. And so for me, I felt that would be stronger in New York. And sure enough, I started working with a nonprofit, part-time consulting. And with that nonprofit, I was able to connect to someone else who told me they were looking to start Birthright Africa. So that's the other thing. I also knew I didn't have a very unique brand. If I was thinking about launching Birthright, this is something in the culture we've been talking about for a while, especially if you're of African descent. So I knew there was going to be that one person that I wanted to connect with and ultimately even potentially co-found with, because it was just an idea by myself. And so with that position that I got at the nonprofit in New York, I had to have an MBA. I knew there was no way that I could get the position without the MBA. The individual that ended up calling me saying, hey, I want to do this Birthright Africa with you, they looked up my background. They did due diligence on who I was to make sure that they felt like I was going to be someone that they wanted to engage with. So obviously they saw the Goldman Sachs, they saw the MBA, they saw the history of the education career that I built because of the MBA that I got. And they happened to know the chairperson of the nonprofit I was working with at the time. And so in the conversation, it was, instead of, oh, we're going to try to take this from you, okay, let's partner. That can happen too, especially if you're in entrepreneurship. And let's be clear, as women, we're also vulnerable to that. This happened to be a male. And his network was so much greater than mine in education, in New York in particular, but even just around the country, that I jumped in. He was willing to just bring me in, work out of his office. I didn't have an office at the time. And so he introduced us to our first education partner, the City University of New York. Can you imagine starting your nonprofit with the world's largest university, urban university? That solidified us. And so we did so well with that and had the great impact with them. They replicated the program the next year. I realized his power and connection. I decided to make him my co-founder. I mean, I don't think that would have happened without an MBA. Like, everything led up to partnering with the City University of New York, because they also saw that I had this 10 years of education work. And it was because of the MBA that I entered that level to move forward. So yeah.
Wow. See, I'm glad I asked you that question, because it's always good to just put in context what we talk about networking and what it looks like, and the path and history. So it's work, but work can come in different forms. That's the beauty of networking. So Vivian and Alex, you're going to wrap this up for us and talk about giving back. We are at the Forte Foundation. I know I didn't mention this earlier. I am on the board of Forte, one of the best decisions I ever made. I am surrounded by dynamic women leaders, and we want more leaders. So it's all about giving back. how about you guys just give us your how the MBA influenced you in giving back, like what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I'll start by saying that, I went into my MBA experience with an intention to come out focused on empowering and impacting girls and women, especially Black and brown girls. And I knew that by getting that MBA education, just by virtue of having it and having the doors that it would open for me and the positions that it would put me in, would naturally put me in a position to be able to pour down into other generations, to be able to be to have a seat at the table and open doors for mentorship and have conversation. And so I knew that was something that I was going to want to take advantage of. And I've done it throughout my entire career, both within my organization and outside. For a number of years after graduating, I knew pretty much every single woman that wanted to do consumer marketing, I think, across the top business schools, because I opened myself up for conversations to help them think about going to business school and get their MBA, but also what their career would look like after that. Within my MBA experience myself, one of my closest friends there, we met at the Association for Women in Business kind of entry event, and we, pledged to become co-presidents of that, and we did. And that helped me become, a focused leader in terms of charging forward on things tied to women's rights, empowering women, breaking down barriers for women around the world. And so I brought that into the work that I did. I was part of a lot of our women employee resource groups within Johnson & Johnson. It was especially meaningful in the Middle East and Africa. As you can imagine, there's a lot of barriers to discuss there, and a lot of women that were looking for a differentiated way of leadership, or leadership in general. And so I felt bold in those spaces because I got to practice some of that in my business school experience as a co-lead for Association of Women in Business. And then I just made sure, same like I did in business school, when I put pen to paper on something, you have to manifest that. You go from the case study to the conversation to the realization of it. And so I made sure that in community, I definitely was part of, giving back, tying myself back to, local organizations within any city that I lived in that was focused on this mission. But I will say, just having that experience of going to business school has really, lent itself for me to be able to, touch someone on the shoulder, look them in the eye and say, you can do this too. You can do better than I could ever imagine for myself. And to encourage them to, take those steps forward as leaders themselves.
Alex.
Amazing. So, I have the final word. and then I know we're running over time, but if we do have a couple moments for questions, I'm sure there are some in the group. And apologies for any background noise. My husband is actually cooking our dinner right behind me, which we didn't touch on, but maybe an additional benefit of a great support network during the MBA is to have someone help you at times like this. I actually met my husband in the MBA, so another unintended benefit. So in terms of giving back, I'll follow the same structure, Vivian. I think you laid it out nicely. There's giving back in the MBA, right? And how do you choose to spend your time while you're there giving back? And then how does that kind of feed through into your life post MBA? I think one thing to consider is really like, what is the vector, on which you'll choose to have impact or to add value? I think, choosing your lane, so to speak, a little bit gives you the opportunity to magnify or accelerate your impact. I think, sometimes there's a temptation to like spread yourself thin across a number of different places that you're interested in. I think the tactic that I have primarily used when thinking about where to give back has really been on the topic of women and empowering and lifting up women, particularly in the context of business, and particularly, using the mechanism of mentorship and sponsorship as the way of doing that. In the MBA, I took a number of different opportunities to give back. I was part of our Women in Management Association during the year when we launched what we called our We Men program. So our association was called WEMA, the Women in Management Association. We added 2 men to our executive team. It was the first year in which we actually engaged our male colleagues. This was a really important choice for us because it opened up a discourse with our male colleagues around how they could be better advocates and sponsors and mentors of women after they left the MBA. I think research still tells us that our male colleagues will enter at higher positions, at higher income levels, and they will progress faster through organizations. And while that is still the case, it's important for us to engage our male colleagues in that. So that was sort of an important way, I think, in which our year gave back. I also launched a conference, which was the Canadian Graduate Women in Management Conference while I was at Rotman. It's now in its 4th or 5th year, where we actually bring together women in graduate management programs across Canada to engage in conversation and to work with speakers and facilitators from a number of different industries. So that happens over the course of 2 days, once a year at Rotman. And then finally launched with a number of my Forte colleagues a program called Links, which is a mentorship program that connects female undergraduate students with MBA mentors. And we did this actually as a way of sort of paying forward all of the support that we had received as Forte Fellows. So this was just Forte Fellows that initiated the program. It's still running now. I sit on the board of the organization, and it's still Forte Fellows to this day that run that program. And we've sort of created a playbook, which we've fed back into Forte, which has been shared across a number of different graduate management programs across Canada and the US. So a number of different ways to kind of give back sort of while you're in the MBA. I think the message there being kind of pick a vector, pick a lane, and then you'll sort of take the learnings across the things that you do in that lane, and you can use that to accelerate your impact. I continue to kind of push on that vector in my life at McKinsey and spend a lot of time on female recruiting efforts, particularly as it relates to digital, which is and STEM, which are sort of underrepresented fields for women. So continuing to kind of do the good work there, and then always excited to participate in these types of events outside of my McKinsey life as well. So I think all that to say, lots of options while you're in school, lots of ways to take that forward after you leave, and kind of think about the ways that you can institutionalize your impact. I think the We Men program being a really good example of that. How can you make sure that others for many years to come will benefit from the impact of your work?
Awesome. Thank you. Again, I'm surrounded by very talented women here. I know it's 1 minute past the hour. Ashley, do we have time for Q&A? Mute.
Okay, now
Alex called it. Alex
called it. I mean, somebody had to do it. We are out of time, but I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you for the amazing experiences that you shared with our audience today. We appreciate your time and commitment and paying it forward. I think that was such an amazing theme that you all touched on, and you did that in so many different ways and so authentically. So I want to say a big thank you to our panelists. Nogi, thank you for your expert moderation. We appreciate it. So I just want to, I'll close us out, or maybe I'll let Nogi close this out, but I just want to say thank you on behalf of Forte and our attendees.
Okay, no pressure, Ashley. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this panel. Thank you again, Dawn, Wala, Vivian, Alex. You all are great, and you keep doing great things. Come join the board. Come join anything that pushes Forte up. And then to all of you out there who are thinking about the MBA, look at us. We did it. We were just as confused, worried, scared, but we took the first step. And that's exactly what you're doing tonight. You're taking the first step and learning and understanding what it's all about. We're available to answer any questions that you have. You can reach out to us. I'm sure Forte will provide. Ashley is going to provide more information on how to get in touch with all of us. And you may think you know nothing, but the fact that you think that way means you're learning something. So all the best and good luck on your application process. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
You got this, ladies.